There's been no shortage of World War II-related superlatives to describe the war in Ukraine. It's among the worst ground wars in Europe and sparked perhaps the fastest-growing refugee crisis on the continent since the Second World War. Well, in late March, the head of the United Nations World Food Program added another grim reality to that list. The war is creating a local agricultural and global food supply catastrophe beyond anything seen again since World War II. Well, for more, senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Rabah Arezki, joins me for perspective. He's also the former chief economist for the MENA region at the World Bank. Thanks so much for joining us, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Can you start by telling us what effects the war in Ukraine has had on food supplies and prices outside of the region, in both the developed and the developing world?
So the crisis has two distinct effects on food market. It first disrupted the supply of food directly coming from Russia or Ukraine. So for those directly importing for these two countries, there have been shortages and risk to these shortages have risen. The second effect is more global, is more far-reaching, and is impacting food market, which have since the beginning of the conflict increased by over 40%. And this is on top of already rising food prices.
Why are the world's poorer nations in particular so vulnerable?
The world poor, Africa in particular, which is home to 70% of the world poor, is most affected because both at the macro level and at the micro level, households spend a large amount of their expenditure toward food and energy.
What do you think are the main flaws in global food supply chains that are causing these vulnerabilities?
The world is globalized. We trade in food, and as a result, there are interconnections that do create dependencies. But of course, the continent has also has been having trouble with improving food system and agriculture, and as a result, is heavily dependent on imports.
You've said before, sir, that African countries can protect themselves against future shocks to their food supplies by developing better functioning food systems and transforming their agricultural sectors. What barriers remain to this being done already, especially because these are not the first shocks that we've ever seen?
Now, there are long-standing issues related to access to capital, issues related to land registry, but there's also long-standing issues on competition in the distribution and transport sector.
So the war now has been going on for 65 days. Have countries that are reliant on Ukrainian or Russian grains, for example, been able to offset these losses thus far? And if not, what's preventing them from doing so?
The countries have tried many different policies to try and offset that, including price control, which are extremely costly for governments that are already in deficit and indebted. Others have let the international price pass through to domestic prices and solely target vulnerable segment, but that's difficult as well. And most of these countries have run out of buffers after the global financial crisis, the COVID crisis. So they do need the support of the international community to support them in their effort to shield the most vulnerable segment of the population.
Do you think that support from the international community, are there any signs that support is going to come? And if it does come, that it'll be adequate?
Absolutely. So the World Bank and the IMF have, during the COVID crisis, they have stepped up. They are helping countries procure food in international market. We, of course, need much more. And there are calls for an important, bold action by the international community concerning debt. Debt restructuring has been missing of the global agenda. The common framework has been stalled, and as a result, if there is financial resources transferred to developing countries, or if countries have resources, these resources risk going to private creditor if we don't restructure debt speedily.
You've also argued that the best way to protect people from poverty and food insecurity in any country is to build a more efficient social protection system, but that countries lack the fiscal flexibility to do so. Do you think that it's also a question of political will?
No, it's of course political will is always important, but resources to build this buffer is really the main issue at the time.
Do you think that Western countries are still lacking resources to build these types of buffers here?
Western countries, sorry.
Yes. Do you think that Western countries are lacking the resources to further bolster their own social security nets?
The Western countries have themselves a much more developed protection system, which have helped quite a bit during this crisis and the previous one. What's missing is really a protection system in developing countries.
Given all of the catastrophic effects that we've just kind of discussed and that France 24 has been covering for weeks now, since the start of the war, as an economist, do you think that sanctions against Russia were in some way a mistake, given all of these effects? Or do you think that this is the fault of governments that fail to adequately protect against them?
No, I wouldn't say that sanctions are a mistake. The important, I think, decision the international community has to make and take bold action on is to stop that invasion and restore peace to Ukraine. That would solve most of the problem we are seeing in the world.
So, sir, perhaps just to finish, what do you think that the world risks in the coming months if more ambitious action on some of these food issues, food shortages, is not taken?
There are serious risks of social instability, especially in the poorest country. We've seen already countries like Sri Lanka, which is a country that is heavily indebted and heavily food and energy dependent, suffer some of that social instability. And of course, this episode reminds us of the 2011 Arab Spring, where indeed food prices have also skyrocketed and created social instability.
Rabah Arezki, thank you so much for all of that insightful analysis and for your time coming on the show today.
Thank you very much.